Little thing. All right. So, hi, everybody. Welcome back to the 50th episode of Celebrating the Brand Ambassador. And I am really excited to be here with some old work colleagues of mine, Ewan Gunn and Nicole Austin. I don't think I ever can do as good a job as you can introducing yourselves and what your roles are. So I'm going to start with Nicole, because I'm a believer of ladies first. So Nicole, can you introduce yourself and what your current role is and also what your responsibilities are? And don't feel the need to be brief on that because I think not everybody knows exactly what a distiller does and what a distiller role can be because it can be different for everybody.
Yeah, well, I think you hit the nail on the head there, right? Because it's the kind of title that gets bandied about quite a bit, but I think it means something really, really different, depending on what company you work for and, what it is that you're trying to accomplish. So right now, my title is General Manager and Distiller for Cascade Hollow Distilling Co., which is we were wholly owned by Diageo. It's a piece that is based at Cascade Hollow in Tennessee. And the reason that they made my title General Manager and Distiller for Cascade Hollow and not for George Dickel is it kind of an acknowledgement that it's the entire place and that we do more things and have the capability to do more things besides making George Dickel. So that's obviously our core brand, and that would be the one that most people know is George Dickel, which is a 150-year-old Tennessee whiskey brand. But Cascade Hollow also can and has historically made other things. And so they left me, I think, purposefully a bit of wiggle room to, create maybe some new and interesting brands. And the biggest one I've done so far is Cascade Moon, which is sort of a fun, kind of more weird whiskey brand. Things that you probably wouldn't want to release, on a name like Dickel that has that 150-year heritage that you need to be respectful of. But my responsibilities, I think you kind of get a sense of it from that sort of general manager and distiller combined title. It's really a tailor-made role for me because I'm a super micromanager, and I have responsibilities across kind of all the pieces of Cascade Hollow. So I might be actually one of the only folks inside Diageo that has kind of jobs both on the what they call the supply side, which is the people that actually make the stuff, and then the demand side, which is sort of the marketing and sales piece. And I actually have some responsibilities on both sides, which is, I think, pretty unique in Diageo. So when it comes to the production side, which is sort of the distiller part of my role, which I think is the more interesting part for everyone, I want to be super candid. Like I don't turn the boiler on in the morning. Like the distillery does not need me to be there to run. And thank goodness, because that guy gets up at 3:30 in the morning and like not have that in me. But essentially my role is to oversee what happens at the distillery. And what I mean by that is, set quality standards, right? Sort of make decisions around, well, how much of this thing are we going to make and how much of this other thing are we going to make? And what new things might we want to try to make? And when we do try to make new things, what is good? Which things can we make and how do you set the standards for those? So I do a lot of kind of quality setting and like kind of strategic, like directional decisions. So what are we going to focus on? And then if something goes a little wonky, like it's maybe not the quality that we want, I get pretty involved in like what might we want to do to address that. And then also a lot of thinking around, what is the distillery going to be like in the future? So do we need to expand, and when and if that happens, where and how and all those things. So that's the distiller piece. And then the general manager piece is the, what brands are we going to sell, right? And where and how are we going to talk about them and how are we going to market them? And, so all those kind of more traditional marketing roles.
Wow. You didn't tell me this the other day when we talked. I had no idea. I was always wondering why your title was Cascade Hollow Distillery. And now I know. And that's a lot of responsibility for one person.
I wouldn't have it any other way because I'm crazy like that.
That's one thing I know about you. Actually, I can see that. That would be not that you're crazy, that you wouldn't have it any
Yeah,
other
no, I
way.
sure am not offended. That's a fair sum up. Yep.
I love it, and that's an inspiring thing for many people, I'm sure, to realize. All right, there's many different things we could do in the industry, and that is one of them. And like, what a great career! And you're right. I don't know any other person at least at Diageo, that has that divided role between marketing and management, and also in distilling. So well done on you.
I think it's pretty rare, and I hope hopefully we'll see more of it, because I think it's really been a big part of why this has been successful for the last couple of years. So I think we'll start to maybe see more things like this, both at Diageo and at other companies.
I love it. I hope so as well. Thank you, Nicole.
Yeah.
So you tell us about, again, your role. You have the global brand ambassador role, which can mean so many different things. So what is your exact title?
Yeah. I thought I had a pretty cool job. I think Nicole might have me beat, actually. So my job title is Senior Global Scotch Whisky Ambassador at Diageo. And I primarily look after our luxury portfolio of single malts and blended Scotch whiskies, but I also do a pretty broad variety of work across our entire Scotch portfolio. So I kind of get involved in bits of everything, from building brand training and education programs. I do quite a bit of work on some of the storytelling about our huge portfolio of whiskies. I do some support work for innovation teams when they're launching new products, doing serve creation, that kind of thing. I do a lot of work with our PR teams, particularly around brand launches, especially on those luxury releases. Also recently, as I'm sure you know, we've just opened our Johnnie Walker Princess Street experience in Edinburgh, and we're relaunching quite a few of our brand homes for our distilleries in Scotland. So I'm doing a lot of work with how we share the news of that with the world, and also looking at how we welcome people to Scotland to experience them. So yeah, it's quite a varied role, which I absolutely love.
No, you must be doing a pretty good job, because I keep hearing how amazing Princess Street is.
It's so good, honestly. If anyone's thinking of going but hasn't been, make your way there. You will absolutely love it. I think what's great about it is it kind of has something for everyone. So if you're a fanatical Scotch lover, there'll be something there for you. And if you're completely new to Scotch and know nothing at all, there will still be something that you'll really, really enjoy. So it kind of talks to everyone, and every visit is bespoke and unique to you. So it's so cool.
That is very cool. Now I haven't. Yeah. Well, I've been wanting to get back to Scotland anyway, and I always love going to Tennessee. I'm like, I haven't been back to Cascade Hollow. Oh my God, I did an entire presentation on Tennessee whiskey, and Diageo allowed me to go to Tennessee for about 4 or 5 days to go to all the places. Yeah. So it's been a while, and I was also there for one of the anniversaries. I don't know if it was the 100th, or I don't know which anniversary it was.
Not much has changed.
Not much. Not much has changed.
I promise you, very little has changed.
Which I love about it. Which I love about it. That's what makes it so amazing. But I'm glad to hear about the center, and you guys really do have the real cool jobs at Diageo. You managed to find some really cool paths. All right, so let's talk about that. Right, so. One of the things, like Nicole, starting with this, because I love the story, your path to working in the liquor industry was definitely not traditional. So can you share your story of just how your career began and how you made the leap?
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole thing about the liquor industry, right? Is I don't think anyone takes a traditional path here, because if you were taking a traditional path, you wouldn't end up here, right? In this industry.
That's true.
So I don't think that's unique to me, but my particular path, I think there's probably not a lot of folks that come through the wastewater treatment industry, which is in fact where I got my start. Yeah. So, and you know what? Not necessarily the path I would recommend. It was, I went to school for chemical engineering, which, I felt very cool at the time. And, felt like prepared to take on the world and do anything. And it turns out most of the jobs are like oil and gas or pharmaceuticals is kind of where they steer you. And it's like, that sounds like sucking my soul out my eyeballs. Like, I wouldn't do that. Right. And so I thought I would go into environmental engineering because that sounded really cool. And I thought I was going to like save the planet and like be the next Aaron Brockovich. And like, that was my, life plan. And I was like, I'm going to rock around Manhattan in a mini skirt and like save the world, that was my life plan. It turns out that environmental engineering in New York City is mostly wastewater treatment plants. And so, fast forward a few years and I'm standing in like hip waiters in the New York City sewer, like really, kind of fundamentally questioning my life choices. And, like looking around, right, and trying to figure out, what am I going to do? And do I want to do this? And, what other roles might there be for me? And one of the reasons I'm so kind of passionate about educating bartenders is completely no bullshit. A good bartender changed my life. And, that like across the bar education is what changed everything for me. So I was at a bar called Char Number 4, which was an old bourbon bar in Brooklyn, and being educated by an amazing bartender. I really at that time candidly knew nothing about whiskey, but I was curious and interested, and he was excited to have someone who was interested to talk to about it. And so he was like pouring me things and telling me about them. And he told me how a particular whiskey was distilled. And I just had that, holy shit moment. Like, that's literally what I went to school to learn how to do. No one mentioned that I could make whiskey with this skill. Like, that sounds so much infinitely cooler than what I'm doing now. And that was what changed it for me. That's how I decided to get into the industry.
Which I love that. I mean, the fact that, and I'm sad that they don't tell people. And B, I just love the fact that the light bulb went off and you were like, I can actually use this degree to do something else so much cooler than I ever imagined. I mean, you, and actually to that point, Ewan was telling me that he got to go in when you were working for a different company, doing, you went to MBA programs. You might have inspired some people and taught them about whiskey.
Maybe, yeah.
I'd love to do that stuff. That's very cool.
Yeah. Have you ever done that? Because I find that, sorry to get off track a little bit, because I'm like, this is a great idea. And I'm surprised it's not part of programming for a lot of brands to go into MBA programs to teach the future drinkers of America how to drink, whiskey or any spirit at all.
Maybe I'll come back. Who knows?
Maybe I'll come back. Nicole, have you ever done that? Have you ever gone to an MBA or program?
I've not gone through an MBA program, but I've done a lot of like speaking to graduate folks, because I agree with you. I think it was a big miss that no one mentioned that I could do this as a job. And I feel like more people would stick with a chemical engineering degree if they learned that they could do cool things with it. So I love to go talk to like students about this as a career path, because I really kind of wished that someone had told me sooner.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, Ewan, let's talk about you. So what career path led you to your first job with being a brand ambassador within the industry?
Yeah, it was, well, I studied German language and literature at university, and I can honestly say that German love poetry does not lead you into working as a brand ambassador, but it definitely made me know what I didn't want to do with the rest of my life. But my languages did give me my first job, which was with a very small whiskey company called Cadenheads. And I looked after their global sales straight out of university, which sounds impressive, but they're a very small company. They are tied to Springbank Distillery, though they're sister companies. So one of the great things that I did straight away, they had me actually working in the distillery for, I think it was about 3 or 4 months, doing everything, because they did everything on site from malting through to bottling. So I got a really good understanding of how whiskey's made and how flavors created. And I mean, I still use that knowledge to this day because it was so useful. So doing it hands-on for an extended period of time. But it was quite a cool role, because it was primarily a sales role, but it was also looking after markets all over the world. So you're looking at the marketing, the PR, and actually a lot of the time doing tastings and a lot of what a brand ambassador does. So because it was such a small company, I was kind of doing bits of everything, and, started to realize which parts I enjoyed and which I didn't. About 3 years after starting there, I've been in the industry about 24 years now. I'm probably what qualifies as an old timer, which is slightly depressing.
Shocking how quickly that happens, isn't it?
Yeah, it's terrifying. So yeah, I did that for about 3 years, and then I moved to a company called Angus Dundee Distillers, and I looked after their Central and Eastern European and Middle Eastern markets, again in a sales role. But there was, again, elements of brand ambassador work as part of that. And it was around then that I realized that was the part that I really loved. So there was a job came up actually with Bacardi, specifically on the Dewar's brand based in the USA, based out of New York, but looking after the whole USA as their USA brand ambassador. So I applied for that job, not for a minute expecting I'd get it, and did. So I spent about 4 years based in New York covering the USA as their brand ambassador for their Scotch portfolio. Had a brilliant time, as you'd expect, and then moved on to their global team and did a further 3 years as their global brand ambassador, again looking after Dewar's, but also William Lawson's, which is another one of their blended brands, and some of their malts, which were sort of early stages starting to gain some traction. So I was with Bacardi for 7 years in total, and then I moved to Diageo almost exactly 11 years ago today, and have basically been with Diageo ever since, always in a global role, and yeah, absolutely love what I do. So yeah,
amazing.
A few companies, but yeah, I mean, this has definitely been the one I've been with the longest, so that maybe says something.
I'm sure it does, and it sounds like you have a great job. And I guess I'll dive right into another question I know I had for you, because this is something that I don't know if you experienced this at all, but even if you didn't, if you guys had an opinion on this, because I get asked a lot by people who make the switch, right? Or want to make a switch, because it is hard. Like if you work for one company for a long time and the industry identifies you. I mean, granted, when you did Bacardi, social media was not as big of a player. So you might not have been as well known as you probably are now. And now everybody knows you know, you're posting on social media, you're putting yourself out there, and people identify you as that brand, right? So making the switch sometimes, it's emotionally, sometimes it's hard, because moving from, you fall in love with the brands. If you're you generally have an emotional connection to the brands you work with. So to fall, and I know, Nicole, you experienced something, you know, you had to switch from one to another. How do you, any advice of like, how to handle it so like the industry accepts you in your new position, you know, even if you didn't experience it yourself? Like, if you have any thoughts about that, Ewan, I don't know if you want to go first. If you have
yeah, I mean, I can do. I mean, certainly looking back, you know, I've been quite fortunate that every company that I've moved on from, it's always been on really good terms and for the right reasons. And you know, Bacardi to Diageo was no different. You know, I enjoyed my role there. They treated me well, and I've still got a lot of friends there. You know, but when the opportunity to move to a company with a portfolio like Diageo has, you know, you're going to jump at that opportunity. I think, you know, the thing I think I would advise anyone to be conscious of if you're looking at moving from one company to another, you know, definitely be conscious of that transition. You know, you're shifting from one brand to another. You're shifting from how people view in one way to another. You know, I'd represented Bacardi Scotch whiskies for 7 years and others prior to that. So I think a lot of it comes down to how you've gone about representing those brands and companies. You know, I've always focused on really looking at the positive aspects of the brands I represent. You know, I've always shown respect for competitors and their brands. So my advice to anyone in the spirits industry would be do the same. You know, treat your competitors with the respect that they deserve, because one, it'll stand you in good stead if you're ever interviewing for a job with them. But I think it also gives you authenticity and, you know, a sense of integrity in your working day. You know, trashing the competition, it's never classy, and it generally only succeeds in making you look trashy. So, you know, I think as long as you've always behaved in that respectful manner, making that transition from another brand that you love to a new brand that you will love as well, I don't think it should be an issue.
No, I agree. I think that's great words of advice, and it is about always being professional. And I don't know if the industry cares. I mean, I'm sure you might have had to have a few conversations with people like, "Hey, aren't you worked? I thought you worked for blah blah blah. Oh, you're doing this when that happened." But I don't think there's judgment there.
No.
It's more, it's whiskey. It's good whiskey. Both great portfolios. If you moved from one and it wasn't great, or a really amazing one, and then to one that people didn't respect, you might be like, you might be selling out there, my friend. But you move from one great portfolio to another. Nicole, I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
I would say, I think excellent advice. I wish that someone had told me earlier, because I think I came into this industry pretty young and dumb and did do a fair bit of shit talking, and I regret a lot of what I said. But it's not impossible to come back from that. So I think, you just have to be, I think integrity is the key word that you said that really kind of stands out for me is, being willing to put a hand up and admit when you were wrong, or, when you screwed up, and like, saying that, doing that, saying that, I've learned. I think people really respond to, as long as you're being pretty upfront about it. And, I'm pretty candid, right? Of like, when I started in craft, like I never thought I would go and work for a big company. And, now what I know now and how incredibly rewarding it is, it doesn't make me uncomfortable, to talk about that progression, and I'm able to really explain myself. And I think, these days, someone might have accused you of selling out a while ago, and I don't know, maybe they still would, but I think everyone understands that like getting paid is really helpful.
Yeah.
That helps.
I don't think that, I don't think that that's as big of a deal these days, and people understand, and as long as the ethos of the brand that you move to, fits with the personal ethos that you have, I don't think it would be a problem to move from one to the other.
No, I think those are both great reverse. And you're right. Back in the day, we were all very precious. Yes. So precious. And trust me, as the person who was working for Diageo and then going into, I think about all the bars, they used to be like, I'm not carrying those brands because they're big company brands. And now they all carry those brands. And suddenly t-shirts like Vodka Pays the Bills started popping up because, they realized, well, I need to do business. And these small brands don't have any money. Yeah. So, and these brands are actually, these big brands, they're actually good. There's some good quality here. So maybe I should stop thinking so small and think about the big picture. So, no, very
I think
true.
also, when people meet folks like our distillers, our blenders, folks like Nicole, they realize that, just because you happen to work for a big company rather than a small one doesn't mean you're any less passionate than someone that works for a small company, So I think, the fact that our blenders and distillers are getting out there and meeting people, that definitely helps with that as well.
No, absolutely. You're just like, I just get a 401k and benefits.
Yeah, exactly.
There's nothing wrong with that. I mean,
why is that a bad thing? It's not.
That's never a bad thing. And that's the one actually is something that's interesting about our industry. I went to the beer industry and working for Anheuser-Busch, and people really in the craft beer industry really do not like Anheuser-Busch. I mean, they are considered the evil being. And unlike the spirits industry, where now people, if you're a small craft distiller and you get acquired, people might give you a little razz, like maybe a little bullshit, but they're like, hey, when they see how much you got bought for, they're like, good for you. Like,
mostly it's congratulations, honestly. Like, it's like, congrats, right? Good on you. Like, it's
in the beer industry, it's not like that. You are banned for life. They will not talk to you ever again. I watched brewers. I was heartbreaking. Who literally, one guy at Colorado Beer out of Brazil, he created the craft beer movement in Brazil. Like, he was the man. Nobody will talk to him ever again. He was just, because he sold his company to Anheuser-Busch, and he was still heavily involved. He was all in the process, but nope, he was banned for life. So
I was deathly afraid when I took this job. So the announcement came out when I was at the American Craft Spirits Association conference. And so I was like surrounded in a hotel with hundreds of craft distillers. And I was like, are people going to throw tomatoes at me? Like, is this, and 100% what you said is so right. Everyone across the board was like, congratulations. This is so amazing. I'm so happy for you. And I think they were all like, and happy for me too. I think everyone was so glad that the craft spirits industry was getting that kind of recognition from major players. Like, I think we learned from the beer industry, right? Of like all those people who were, as you said, so precious and so dogmatic, but they're like, but like, I'd like to send my kid to college, or like, maybe actually this isn't so bad. I think we learned from the beer folks.
Yeah, I think we learned. I think we all did and came up better for it. So let's actually talk into it. So Nicole, you definitely worked very hard to earn some street cred when you first came out. You were young, you were a female, you were coming into the industry. You just came from wastewater management. Right. And you're now wanting to be a distiller. So tell us a little bit about that journey and like some of the valuable lessons you kind of learned along the way that kind of helped you build your career.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think anyone working now, it's amazing how much the industry had changed, between like the mid 2000s and now. Craft spirits was just barely a thing. When I was first getting the idea that I wanted to be in this industry. So I was, showing up and paying my own way to go to like every, tasting event, every indie spirits thing that I could go to. And I was armed with like resumes and perky emails and, all the things that you need when you're trying to get a job. And mostly I was hearing like, oh, we don't actually have a distillery, It was a lot of what you heard at tables those days. And I was really starting to feel like, that was maybe never going to happen. It was just like a couple really big players who, I didn't want to start again at the bottom of a corporate ladder and, not be getting anywhere for 50 years. You go to something that really stuck in my mind the first time I went to Scotland was like meeting folks who, now run these amazing distilleries, but their story is like, I was born a quarter mile down the road and I've been working here, for decades and decades to get to this place. I was like, that sounds like no fun at all. It's like, I mean, good on you, but like, I want to wait 40 gazillion years. So I was trying to like just find my way in craft because I thought there was more opportunity there. And I showed up at the first day that Kings County Distillery in Brooklyn ever sold their booze, and essentially very perkily, introduced myself. And I was like, I am a chemical engineer and you're welcome. And I will work here now, and that was how I got into the industry. So they started in April of 2010 is when they got their license. And it was July when I joined them. And so we were they were super tiny, 5-gallon stills in basically an elaborate closet in Williamsburg. But that was, how I got in. And we were working from a book called Making Pure Corn Whiskey. And I was, I kept my day job because Brooklyn rent. And I was just doing that on the nights and weekends. And that was how I got in. So that was 2010.
Wow. That's but it's sometimes how you have to get in, right? You have to kind of do the extra gig to kind of start somewhere to get your cred. But you learned something, but also to start building your career. Obviously, you were working there. How did you use that place to kind of launch you into the world?
That's exactly what I used it for, because it certainly wasn't doing a whole lot else for me. It certainly wasn't paying my Brooklyn rent, but it was, it was giving me something to talk about in a way to kind of learn the craft, learn the trade craft that I wanted to practice in, and then also build a network. I think the thing that I did that was probably my best decision was I showed face at every conference. I got really involved in the industry. I dedicated really a genuinely absurd amount of unpaid time and effort, both to Kings County and like building their company and brand, and also to industry work. So like founding the New York State Distillers Guild and doing a lot of lobbying work and helping found the American Craft Spirits Association. Wow. And doing, being on the board and co-chairing the legislative committee and like doing the work that would preserve the industry. And the idea that if this is the industry I want to work in, it behooves me to make sure it's healthy and, sustainable. And it's not necessarily a path I would recommend. I think I got pretty lucky that it worked out. And I was definitely, I didn't have a lot of friends for a lot of years because I was functionally like working my day job and then also working this other job. But it absolutely is what got me, where I am. And I paid my own way to all those conferences, but that network that you build, in doing that, sort of in putting yourself out there and meeting people obviously it's an incredible privilege that I was able to do that, that I had a job that I could fly myself across the country to go to these conferences. But that network is what gave me the ability to do what I'm doing now.
No, which it is an amazing story, and it speaks a lot to your work ethic and your willingness to hustle to build your career, because not everybody has that in them to do. And I understand that my friends haven't seen me in months now, and I realized
every Saturday for like 5 years, every Saturday and Sunday at the distillery. It was
That's a lot. So I would say the only thing you probably would do over again would be to get paid.
I think that would have been nice. I think I would advise people to like, if someone offers you sweat equity, know that only turns into money if they sell the company.
Mm-hmm.
And even if they sell the company, that doesn't necessarily mean money for you unless you're in like the right share class. It's very confusing. So I think my best nugget of advice that I learned from those years is like have a lawyer look at contracts.
Yes.
And if it's so easy to, I think, get swept up in the like, we're all friends and we're so passionate and we're creators and like, but you are still going to want to, get paid money at some point.
Yeah, lawyers are good for that. I now have lawyers do all my contracts, and it doesn't cost that much, and it costs money, but it doesn't cost as much as you might think, and it's well worth it because they see things that you would never see because they just know how to do those things. Like that little one word can change everything about if you get paid or not get paid when things happen.
And it can help you learn a lot about how much the folks you are working with actually value you, and that's, I think, a worthwhile thing to at least understand.
No, absolutely. All right. So let's talk about, I'm going to jump one question and then we'll go back, but you both travel a lot, right? Because you're in demand. And, I'm sure your calendar, becomes insane when you start to look at your year. So have you learned any things over the course of your career to help you kind of manage your calendar so it doesn't get so overwhelmed? And then what are some items like, because going into a market, so it's like a 3-pronged question. Like, what do you do to manage your calendar to make sure it's not overwhelmed? 2, how do you make sure your market visits are worthwhile? So is there things you make sure are put into place? And then 3, how do you push back when you kind of know it's not worth your time? Ewan, I'll have you start.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's not that exciting, but probably the best way to manage your calendar. Yes, it's simple. I mean, planning and prioritization. I mean, my calendar's usually booked out a couple of months in advance. Obviously, travel the last couple of years has been a bit different to the preceding 2 decades. But just prioritization is key. Knowing which brands are priority, which markets are a priority, and kind of giving them first dibs on your time is really, really important. That needs you to have really great communications with your brand teams and also the teams in market as well. And, solid relationships with them as well, because, you got to trust them to respond to sort of your inquiries and when you ask probing questions about what they're going to be using you for, that kind of thing, you have to trust that they're going to come back with the answers you want to hear. I think,
do you actually, like, at the beginning of a year? I mean, I know this is something I started doing at the end of my career at Diageo was because I realized I'm a mom and I need to make sure my time is really well scheduled so I can arrange for childcare and all those things. And it was, almost putting out a request to the markets, like almost a year, like, hey guys, like these are the projects I'm working on. These are the markets. You guys are one of the markets this is going to be executed in. Can we start putting things in the calendar now? So I start blocking time.
Yeah, I think as much as you can do that as possible, absolutely. I mean, you have to also accept that things are going to change and dates will shift and, priorities will drop and new ones will come in over the course of the year and sometimes with not as much notice as you'd like. But even if you can do some of the groundwork to get the big sort of tentpole things locked into your calendar and then build everything else around it, that's probably quite a smart way of setting up every year and even doing it at a smaller level every month. I think also when you're then looking at going into a market or a city or whatever to do something, making sure in advance that you've got a solid itinerary of worthwhile events is really important, be that training opportunities, media interactions, whatever you're going to be doing in market, but make sure that your itinerary is actually mapped out rather than anything kind of fluffy, because those things either end up not happening or not being worth your time, and it could be better spent elsewhere. So that's pretty important. Agreeing budgets in advance, again, not exciting or sexy, but important. Who's paying? How much are they going to pay? Those kind of things. Yeah, they're not exciting or cool, but they're important, because if you don't do them, things won't happen, or they won't happen the way they should.
No, those are very important things. So, and how do you say no? Because sometimes you do have to do fluffy things, right?
Or it's a simple answer, diplomatically.
Yeah.
I mean, saying no, I think it's always best to do it as early in the day as possible, because that then means there's time for plans to be changed. And I think if you're going to push back on something, it's always good to push back with alternative suggestions rather than a flat no. So that could be on alternative dates, alternative event ideas, or even if you can't do it or it's not appropriate for you to be doing it, maybe it is more appropriate for one of your colleagues to be doing it. So it's actually quite a good way of either sort of sharing the workload, but also quite a good way of actually helping someone that maybe does a bit of BA work in a market, but is looking at moving into a global role. It might be a good way to give them some global exposure. So it's actually, it's not always saying no, it's actually creating an opportunity for someone else.
That's a great way of looking at it. Because there is those times when people call you into the market and you're like, that is not really what you should be using me for. If you're like, it's not really the right fit for me. But yeah, somebody a little more junior this would be the perfect thing for them to be doing. So that's
not even just that. I mean, it could just be that you physically cannot do those dates, but someone else can, and it's a great opportunity for them to shine. So, it's there's always diplomatic ways of saying no, or diplomatic ways of finding solutions, I would say.
Yeah, that's a great thing. So for Nicole, how do you, or has somebody plan your schedule for you?
Candidly, I think I'm really terrible at all three things that you just asked about.
I didn't say I was great at them.
Man, I'm so bad at all of them. So I was like waiting with bated breath, Ewan, for your answer, because I was like, how? Please, I'm thinking I'm going to learn a lot from everything that you said.
I don't do all these things. I just know I should.
Right. Yeah. That sounds right. That's pretty much where I'm sitting, which is like, I know I should be planning. And we always do that. I'm going to have that meeting next week. Like, here's the next calendar year. And pretty much by August, it will have gone to pot, and I will have said yes to like things that I definitely should not have said yes to. And then I really struggle, candidly, with balancing like that piece of my work when I do need to be out in market. And I know it's so important because, the distillery doesn't stay open if we're not selling. So you need to be out there. But also I actually do have some responsibilities at the distillery and some like production things that need done. So I think I move the needle all the time, and I still haven't really nailed it. But we're in a growth phase right now. So like I need to be out there, and I think I probably say yes to more things than I should. But I think that for me, at least, the kinds of things that I get the most value out of are the more like intimate type experiences. So things like staff trainings, or like small group things like whiskey dinners, like where people can really, have the opportunity to chat with me and like, feel like they had kind of a high touch intimate experience. Those, I think for me, tend to feel like they have the most bang for the buck, over, the like larger things, even like the big tasting events and stuff like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I'll tell you some advice that other brand ambassadors have told me. This might be helpful for you.
Welcome.
So one brand, they work very closely with their team, and basically, they basically let the markets know. They reach out to all the key people in the marketplace, and they say, you have this brand ambassador for 4 days. So book out her. You need to like whatever they give a time frame. This is how many days you have this person. So you need to give them at least a 3-month notice. So book it now, like whatever that is. And then so they will then send it out to all the markets. And this is your 4 days. And then as the markets get booked, they're like, these are the months that are left. So like you better schedule them in. So they give them very specific time frames. And then they then say to them, okay, now you have these days filled. These are some of the priority programs or things that she's working on. These are the things they will do. They can do like education trainings, whatever. So fill up her days. Like, so they come back and they have to present a schedule like to them within months. So they know exactly what they're doing for like months in advance. It's pretty, I was like, really? Somebody actually does this? She's like, it works so well. We started doing that. One of the brand ambassadors, she's like, yeah, we started doing it. And it was my manager that made sure, like, so she was always on the person sending it out saying, this is the resource, this is your parameters, make it happen. And if you don't, then you're not getting them. And you need somebody else sometimes more senior to you, like sometimes your boss or something, even if you're in senior positions, to do that. And I was like, that's pretty amazing to be able to schedule that far out. And I will tell you one word of I learned from Michael Stoner, who used to work at Diageo, and he was in charge of all the whiskey brand ambassadors, because I said not take my vacation, or then I would realize my vacation time was running out, and I would try to jam it all in. And he said, Elaine, I'm going to give you advice that somebody gave me. He said, book your vacations the same time every year. So I said, what do you mean? He said, well, my kids are always on vacation, spring break, in April. And then they have like the last week of August before school. And then one other week. He's like, so I always go away the same time every single year. And that way it's always in your calendar.
Yeah.
People know, people won't book anything in there. And you also get better deals because you can book months in advance because you know exactly you're going on spring break. And that was the only way I started going on vacation, like always at the same time. And then nobody could try to, because I've had a few things where I was supposed to go on a family trip, and then I got called in. They're like, no, you can't go. And I was like, why? I'm like, I already told you. They're like, yeah, well, this email technically came in before you told us. So yeah, I was like, seriously? Ouch. So so I started learning, like really just blocking my time, and that was sacred. Like, nope, you're just gonna have to find another. So
that seems to be a total Diageo thing. So I think this entire company empties out like at spring break and August. There's nobody.
Yeah, because you just learn, you just go away those certain periods of time, and you just have to. But still good words of advice. And also it's not easy. And I used to say yes to so many things that I shouldn't. Oh, the other one was I started realizing have my manager. If I had to say no, I would also just use somebody above me. So this person, they could say no for me. So I would just turn. I was like, can you say no to this request? Because I don't I have this, and this going on. So I think it would come back. If it comes from me, it might not go over as well. But if it comes from you, it will. And that really helped me a lot. And they'd be like, actually, Elaine is busy. She can't work on this right now. And we'd come up with recommendations, but I was able to throw it to the top and send it out. And that helped me a lot sometimes.
I have a fabulous team, and yes, they're much more diplomatic than I am. So that is one thing that I've gotten quite good at, is letting them say no.
Yes, it is. And sometimes also it's just sending them should I be doing this? Like, what do you think? So that way they help you say no for you, so you don't say yes to things you shouldn't be doing.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be someone more senior than you. Folks I work with directly, I'm telling them all the time, I'll send them the blunt email, which is absolutely not. And then they, rewrite it and say, oh, I spoke to her. She's busy. So you don't have to, if you can't cultivate this talent yourself, just make sure you work with people.
Other people who can. Well, let's speak of that. So you started telling your story before. You were working in Ireland at Tullamore, and then you returned to the States. So Cascade Hollow Distillery, what led you from one to the other?
So the way I got to Tullamore was actually I took a path sort of through consulting. So at the beginning of Kings County, I was working my kind of full-time engineering job. And then the thing that let me, quit that and be in the whiskey business full-time was I got very, very fortunate to be hired by Dave Pickerel, who was an incredible distiller. And he had a consulting company helping a lot of small distilleries get going. And so he really kind of taught me the ropes on the consulting side of the business. And that's what enabled me to be in the whiskey business full time. And then as Kings County grew a little bit and needed me a little bit more, I stopped working with him and just did some consulting on my own on the side. And it was through that work that I did some work for William Grant and got offered the role of commissioning engineer for Tullamore Dew. So I jumped at that. I mean, it was incredible. It was kind of a real full circle opportunity to go back to being, just an engineer, but in the whiskey business. So that was really cool. And commissioning engineer is basically the one who's responsible for turning it on and going through what they call the commissioning phase, which is when nothing quite works when you first turn something on, and sort of training all the people who are going to run it. And then once it's running well, you sort of hand it over. And I was there when I got the call about this role. So I got a call through a headhunter, which I think, again, is why the network is so important, because, she had heard about me from some other people that she talked to, and they were just like, oh, you should talk to Nicole Austin. And that's how I got this role. So it was very much a word of mouth.
Wow. And what made you what was more appeal? Now you're here, you're in Ireland, which is such a cool place to live. So what was about Yeah. So coming back to the States, that's a big move. So it had to be, the opportunity. What did they present to you as the opportunity?
It was a hard choice. I mean, I love living in Ireland, but Dickel, I mean, what a unicorn, right? Like, what a unicorn of a distillery. I didn't think that the opportunity would ever come up again for something like this, where, it's a heritage whiskey distillery. We can point at the creek and say, like, this is where the distillery was 150 years ago. And like, we're still using that water. And it has just a genuine, true and authentic connection to the heritage of American distilling. And there's only as many of those as there are, and most of them have already kind of had a modern identity assigned to them. They've already grown and someone else has already kind of made their mark, with those distilleries. And Dickel, it had this incredible heritage, and it was just waiting for someone to come along and, kind of define what the next 150 years were going to be about. I mean, what an incredible opportunity. It was just, it's such a beautiful place. And I think it was really, it was an interesting job interview, because I think it might be the first one that I ever sat in, like, where I think we were sort of mutually interviewing each other, because I was quite skeptical actually about coming to work for a big company. I was like, how much autonomy are you really going to give me? How much decision-making power will I really have? What if I want to do this? What if I want to do that? And they just lived up to my expectations and beyond, and all of those questions. And, candidly, I'm really impressed, with working for this company and how much they lived up to it, and really what a great professional experience it's been. It was hard to make the move. Candidly, I absolutely sobbed when I was driving from New York to you come over the Tennessee border and there's a massive Confederate flag, and I just started crying. I had been in the car for 18 hours, but I was like, what have I done? I was sobbing. But in the end, I'm really glad I did it.
Yeah, I love that you said that, in that interview, you were interviewing each other. I've always thought that, every interview should be like that, because, it's not just you begging for a job. They should be begging for you as well. So, yeah, I think any good interview should be interviewing each other. Yeah.
No, absolutely. It's something we talk about. I was just doing this talk at USBG Portland and in Pittsburgh. It's called Brand Ambassador Revelations, and it's a lot about what the job really entails. Mm-hmm. And it is also, we talk about, you need to ask questions. You need to know, is this brand the right fit for you? What does that role look like? Traditionally, I was like, is it education? Is it sales? Is it a combination? Are you working for an agency? And do you ever have interactions with the brand team or not? You need to find, I was like, because that will change your experience as a brand ambassador tremendously. And every role, every job as a brand ambassador for every single company, every single brand, even within the same company, is completely different.
Yeah. I don't think I'd hire someone that had no questions about the job whatsoever. You'd wonder how much they would actually looked into it and how keen they were for it.
No, I think it's a good point, because if you're in demand, I mean, sometimes you just don't have the confidence. You're maybe you're so young, you just don't know. You're like,
it took me a long time to get confident enough to even do that.
Yeah. It does take a while, but it is something that's really important. So it's something I keep trying to impress on some of the younger ones. I was like, don't just I know you just want the experience, but that first experience could be horrible if you go to work for the wrong place, because there's so many part-time brand ambassador roles out there, and it's the hard job. So it is a really, really hard job trying to balance being a bartender and a brand ambassador at the same time. And some companies have very unrealistic expectations of what they want you to do in that 15 hours you have for the week. So, and then any role in any company could be full-time or not. And if you're working for a corporation like Diageo, or just working directly for a brand, very different experience, So yeah, great point, Ewan. Is there any questions, Ewing, if you had to ask something, but you have number one question you would ask if somebody came to you? Did I have to pay?
Sorry, no, never ask that. Well, not early on, anyway.
I do.
I think the thing I always ask is I like to see somehow what the leadership of the company is like, because to me that's the best metric of whether or not they actually live their values. Because I think almost everybody will parrot the right things to you. They'll say they're committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion. They know what the right answers are, and fair pay and creating opportunities and building a career. but you can kind of look at who's in the senior leadership of the company and see whether or not they actually walk the walk. And, if the company, if they say all the right things, but if everybody at the, top 4 levels of the company is an old white dude, that'll tell you a lot.
Yeah, that's probably that is very, very fair. I wish I asked more questions before I went to Anheuser-Busch, but on that point, the pay was really good. And I was like, screw it, let's go. And I needed which is
a totally fair choice to make.
Yeah. Like, it was a huge opportunity, and actually it was an amazing job. And but yeah. So I probably would ask. I did ask because they have the worst rating for working for as a company to work for. They really have really low ratings, and after working there, I understood why. It's a very intense workplace to be in. But I learned a lot. I wouldn't be where I am today if I had not taken that job. So I'm very happy I did that.
I think a good question to actually ask, regardless of the job you're going for, is if in a year's time we're having a conversation and you deem me to have been successful for the past year, what will that success have looked like? Because that'll tell you what their priorities are, but it'll also tell you what they're looking to get from you.
Yes.
And that'll give you a very clear idea of what that first year is likely to be like for you.
Yeah, no, that is a good point, because they can tell you what the job, description is, but sometimes you get in there and that job's completely different than what they described. And that's a great question to ask, because suddenly you'll find out they reveal like, oh, that's what you really expect from me.
Yep, 100%.
Especially as a brand ambassador role, because suddenly they turn around and they're like, well, I expect you to drive increase business by 20% and sell, just make, you're like, what? I'm sorry.
Which is fine if you know that's what you're signing up for.
Yeah, exactly. But if you don't, you're like, that sounds different than what the job describes. And that's what they do. All right. So let's talk a little bit more about, some of the realistic parts of the job, which is, both your jobs are to conduct market visits, right? And spend time with the distributor reps, which is not easy, right? So you kind of learn along the way what to do and what not to do. So, just what are some lessons you have learned on the wrong things to do and right things to do? Or you could just talk about right if you don't want to, but everybody's learned a few things. You're like, oh, shouldn't have done that one.
I don't do as much of that as I used to, but I mean, the key thing that I learned quite early on was respect those reps. You're on their patch, and they've often known and worked with the accounts for years. You're there to enthuse and excite them about your brands. You're not there to teach them how to do their jobs. You'll probably find that they learn something from you, but you'll almost certainly learn something from them as well. And, the last thing I would say is never assume you know everything about them or the accounts they're working with, because you're just there for a day or even a few hours. They've been dealing with these people for months, even years. So just respect them and give them the sort of credit that they're due.
No, I think that's great words of advice, because sometimes you can come in with an attitude. She's like, I'm a hot shot mixologist, and this is my background, and blah, blah, blah. You don't know anything about spirits. And I've seen that. I've seen that happen. That train wreck.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nicole, you?
I think my best advice thinking about that, or my kind of lesson learned, is to remember that you're so immersed in your brand, and all the details of it, and you can kind of start to always let your reference.
That too.
That's
you. Very important.
Great words of advice.
that goes under the respect your rep category, I would say.
Absolutely, 100%. Always be depleting as well. Make sure you buy the cocktail with that.
Yeah,
exactly. Love it.
I think my advice is remember that they had to learn about hundreds of brands, right? And so you're so immersed in the detail. Maybe you even just been in that market a year ago, but they don't remember, they have to hear this stuff all the time. And so you end up having to say the same thing over and over and over and over again. And it can start to feel really tired to you, but and you think, oh, I need to move forward or move on or refresh this material, but actually to penetrate, to get a message that actually sticks with people and then starts to take hold and grow, you have to be consistent for a really long time. So you have to say the same thing over and over and over and over again to get it to stick. And that can be hard. And I think learning how to communicate that and make sure that also when you leave the market that your message was clear and simple enough that it's not going to get garbled when it gets repeated, So simple message that you repeat over and over again, I think actually gets you a lot farther than sometimes the like super, super nerdy stuff that people will ask you about. But it comes to that, like, that media training and stuff that we've all sat there, is like, make sure you pivot back to your point. You've got like 3 bullet points, you say them over and over and over and over again.
No, that's great words of advice. Because you do get bored and you think, oh, I need to change it up because I must be like boring the hell out of these people. And no, you're not. Because they're like, that's the first time I'm hearing that. Or oh yeah, I forgot that, and it gets boring to you, but not to them.
And you want it to like embed in their brain, so that it's top of mind. And like, that's you have to repeat the message, so much to get to that place. And someone pointed something out to me. I wish I could remember who it was, but like, 1% of the American population is still like hundreds of thousands of people. Like, how many times is it to really break through and penetrate and like grow a brand? You have to say the same thing over and over and over again before you've talked to enough people to really make a difference.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I love that the top 3 points is a great thing.
Oh yeah. Because
those nuggets.
You don't want them going away remembering a random fermentation time and forgetting one of the key stories of your brand. That's
100%.
Yeah.
And that's the stuff they'll ask you though. Like, what ABV does it come off of the still? It's like, answer the question, but
back to the key thing.
Pivot back to those top 3 points and how a cocktail they can put on a menu that's simple and easy, that can work everywhere. It's like, and here's a cocktail. Here's, another one for this account. Done. Here you go. Rock this and roll with it. And you're going to sell, a lot of cases. So I think that's great words of advice. And actually, we'll go into one more. We have a few more things. You mentioned media. Right. Because a lot of your job is to do media interviews. It kind of comes with the territory. And as people grow in their roles, they do become that media person if you become really good at your job. So what are some of the best practices you learned speaking to the press? I don't know. Ewing, I guess we'll start with you.
Yeah, sure. First thing, always say yes to media training. Okay. Even if you've done it 1,000,000 times. It's not always fun. It's sometimes downright uncomfortable. But I think it's probably one of the most valuable exercises you can do on a regular basis. And one of the key things that we've just touched on already, always know what you want to say. And that sounds like kind of common sense, but before any media interview, take a moment or two to yourself, remind yourself why you're there today, what the key things you want to land are. And what are the key things you want them to remember? There's going to be lots of other stuff they ask you and lots of other stuff you say, but there should be a few things that you want to really hammer home. Don't be afraid. The media are not your enemy. A lot of people go into media interviews with that kind of perspective, and they're not your enemy. You're both there doing your jobs. There should be mutual respect, and there usually is. Also, get to know them. They're often really nice people. I've built up relationships with members of the media over decades now, and consider some of them very good friends. And we'll go for a drink and talk music rather than whiskey, and that's great, because then when you do talk whiskey with them, they're interested in hearing what you have to say, and they stop viewing you as just a brand mouthpiece, but actually as someone that they're interested in speaking with and learning from. So that's quite a long answer to your question, but that's kind of the things I would say.
Great words of advice. I never thought to become. I have friends who write for independent.
There you go. Then you have journalist friends.
I definitely have journalist friends,
Yeah.
and I haven't met anybody from the New York Times I want to be friends with yet. But who write for the New York Times and who write for the Wall Street Journal. I definitely have those kind of friends. But I think that's great words of advice. Nicole.
Yeah, I think be kind to them. It's a rough industry that doesn't pay super well. Like, I think if you can be nice to them and understand what they need, which is typically like a couple of quotable sentences, as expediently as possible, then they'll come back to you. If you can be like respectful of their time and what they need. So I think being conscious of that is important.
That's really great. So asking them kind of upfront, like, hey, what do you really need out of this?
Yeah, what do you need? Yeah, and like that's, and I will give it to you.
Right. That's the thing you need me to say.
Yeah, just be respectful of them. Like, it's a tough job.
Yeah. Yeah,
it is a really tough. And I guess one of the things I learned is you don't always have to answer the question they ask.
Right.
Nah.
Yes.
Yeah, that was a big one for me, learning that. I remember getting that in media training. They're like, just because they ask you a question, especially ones that are uncomfortable and not true, it's like you can just find a way of answering something else. Like just go around it and come back. And most of the time they'll take the hint. This person's not going to answer that question.
Yeah.
And that's a hard lesson, a good lesson that I learned.
Mm-hmm.
Because like you, Nicole, I can be very blunt.
Yes.
Yes, and say things I should not say out loud. Great words of advice. All right, so let's get Nicole, this is for you because you are a distiller, but you are also a brand and a general manager.
Yeah.
But you're also a brand ambassador. Yeah. And you touched upon this a little bit before. Why do you think, because this is definitely something that's, I think, new. I think most distillers, some of them are out there promoting their brands and being brand ambassadors, but you kind of touched about it. You think this is really important. This is like one of the more important roles of being a distiller.
Yeah, I think I've gone through, all the 5 stages of grief on like the fact that the liquid alone is not what matters, and I wish, right? I'm in acceptance now though, right? Like just making good whiskey is not the only thing that's gonna, make a brand successful or not. And once I realized that, I felt like it was really important to learn this other piece of the business, which is part of why I came to Diageo, because they do it quite well. And, something else, I think being in the craft side, being in the small business side, you learn really, really quickly that like, if no one's buying your product, like you don't get to keep your doors open, and I'll never get to pursue the creative things that I want to do if I don't, also deliver like the sales and the growth and the things that Diageo needs, or that any company needs to keep their doors open, right? And you're doing, the company a real disservice if you don't understand that, and that can be really challenging. So that's why I invest, I think, so much time and effort in the more ambassador part of this role is, I know that I'm not going to get to do any of the things that the big dreams that I have if it's not working, and if it's not selling. Like it's not a hobby, it's a career. So you have to actually, sell the stuff.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And also the fact that, most people, if they have that, we all love meeting the brand ambassador from a brand ambassador who works for the brand, but to meet the actual distiller is a, big deal. Like that is something that, and I know it can be hard for people to get taken away from their distilleries, but it is a big deal. It does make an impact.
Yeah.
And for other brand ambassadors, be able to utilize you as well and be like, I'm bringing in the head distiller to an account. It could open up a lot of doors.
And you learn things. Like I've learned really valuable things about like what works and what people are interested in and what they care about. That, being out in the market, it tells you a lot about like, I learn interesting things that I then take home and use when I'm thinking about what kind of whiskeys to make. So it's really, I've learned a lot, and I think it's also a big thing that's really helped the company grow. That's the point. So yeah,
that's great. It's actually market research for you as well.
Yeah, completely. I mean, and it's hard. Like I don't always love the travel, and I'm not naturally comfortable doing those things, but they're important, and I've learned a lot, and like ultimately they benefit me. And I 100% also recognize that it's like a super first world problem to complain about like, oh, like I have to go to this really cool city and eat like this amazing food, It's like, I should probably not complain about that.
Yeah. Especially when it was taken away from all of us for a while. I was like, yeah. You're like,
oh, that was such a reprieve for me. I can't.
It was a reprieve. It was nice, but at the same time, the minute I got on my first plane ride back, I was like, oh, I'm so happy to be back on my plane.
That's why you two are good at this job, because I'm like, I don't want to
go. I get that. And as somebody who's been out there, and Ewan, I know I didn't put this in the questions, but I do. You are doing something kind of interesting now in your role where you are writing the stories for a lot of. Can you expand upon that? Like that's an interesting part for, I don't know, as many brand ambassadors get to do that, where and they should be turning to people like yourself who are experts rather than the marketing person trying to figure it out, where they probably didn't ever work, definitely don't know as much about whiskey as you do.
Yeah, it's something we've been doing recently with a lot of our sort of higher end luxury releases. So, for example, Talisker 43-year-old that came out last year, our Prima and Ultima collection. We found that people want to not just know about the liquid in the bottle, but they want to dive a little bit more into the story of how it was created, maybe some little stories about the distillery heritage as well. So, one of the things that we're doing is sort of almost writing the story of that launch. And that quite often then evolves into the sort of script, for want of a better word, that brand ambassadors around the world will refer to when they're actually launching it in their market. So it's not just about sort of writing a nice story. It's about actually giving people the tools to then tell that story and share it with media, but also customers and consumers in markets all over the world. And it's it's a lot of fun, because you don't just speak to the blenders, or you don't just speak to the distillers. You're dealing with our amazing team at the Diageo archive, for example. You are talking with our marketing teams. You're dealing with our PR agencies. So you're actually kind of pulling together little nuggets from random different parts of the business, and then pulling them all together and then crafting a story using all of that information. So it's a lot of fun, actually. Yeah. And you inevitably learn something that you didn't know in the process of doing that.
No, that's incredible. That's such an interesting part of the job. It's probably also something you just don't think, I'm a brand ambassador, this is what I'll do one day. This part of the business, you just never know where this job is going to.
Yeah, it's always evolving, and that's what makes it great.
And I've been to the Diageo in Scotland, there's that one building that's like the Diageo archive.
Ministry, right? Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so cool. I could spend days and days in there.
It's amazing.
Really,
it's the largest spirits archive in the world. I think they have about 250,000 individually archived items, and it's everything from full bottles going back a century to advertising from all over the world going back decades, even longer. I mean, it's just a treasure trove of information. It's an incredible place.
Very, very cool. So before we wrap it up, I did have one more question for Nicole, and then we're going to talk about, some words of advice. So, as you know, I'm a huge fan of Dickel. I always have been. And I'm a huge fan of you as well, Nicole. But obviously Tennessee whiskey is such an interesting marketplace. So, you had some thoughts on that, like what's happening within that world, and, what are some new products you're working on? Because I get excited when I see new things from Dickel.
So Tennessee whiskey was interesting to me. Part of what was so intriguing was, obviously coming from the craft side, I was thinking a lot about regional identities. And, when we were creating like Empire Rye, right? And how can multiple producers sort of benefit from having a distinct regional identity that has rules. And Tennessee whiskey was it was the one that survived. It's like the only one that we had, in the US. Scotland is so lucky to have such distinct regions, and people really understand it, and it really it helps them all to, I think, to be able, if you like this one, maybe you'll like the other one. It introduces customers for everybody. And so I came into Tennessee whiskey sort of understanding it as a regional identity of bourbon, but then I realized pretty quickly that most people don't understand it that way, and that getting people to understand it that way was going to be a massive uphill battle, and that it didn't matter how many podcasts I went on or how many staff trainings I did. It was going to be really hard to move the needle on the idea that, George Dickel is not a substitute for the other big Tennessee whiskey brand, right? And like that's a real uphill battle, that I wanted people to understand it as an identity of bourbon, and to, for bourbon drinkers to, I think, come into Tennessee and understand that they could appreciate some of these whiskeys. If you're interested in bourbon, that you could come over here and there's some really nice things. And that's that's a big part of why I chose to release Dickel Bourbon, which is probably one of the most recent releases. A little bit controversial for a brand that's been called Tennessee whiskey for 150 years. But I'm really proud of it. And I think it works because the blend is really emphasizes and delivers on those classic bourbon notes, the vanilla and those things. So I worked a lot on that. I've spent, obviously, most of my releases have really been about blending and Matra and that part of it, because I've only been here for 4 years. You will start to see soon some things that I distilled. But whiskey takes time. It's the nature of the beast. And then, of course, the latest release that I'm really proud and excited about was the collaboration with Leopold Brothers, and the blend of the Cascade Hollow distilled rye whiskey and then Leopold's 3-chamber rye, which is, that one is, talk about, the opportunity to resurrect a piece of history. I mean, what a privilege. And to work with his 3-chamber rye, which is just, I've never tasted a whiskey like this, and there's no whiskey in the world like that. I think he's the only one operating the 3-chamber still right now, and it produces a genuinely distinct flavor profile. That was an incredible project, so I'm really proud of that one, and I'm excited to do more of those.
So just on a curious, so with the bourbon, we'll have the bourbon release, but then there'll still be like the Dickel 12 that's still called Tennessee whiskey.
Yeah, so actually I'm working right now to take the numbers off of those, because I'm sure, having worked as a brand ambassador and done that, I'm sure that everyone will appreciate that, because people constantly are thinking they're calling it like the 12-year-old, and you're constantly having to correct. It's not. It's a recipe number. Day one, I couldn't exactly flip the table over on the heritage of these incredible brands, but the Dickel, the black label, is now classic recipe. The 8 is off of that, to not, make it super, super, super clear when I have this actual 8-year-old whiskey on the shelf, just try and make it really obvious for people what it is. And I'm working on the same thing with the other one. But the Tennessee whiskey brands will stay, and they will continue to be stewarded, as they are. But I'm also just releasing a lot of other things.
Nice. Very cool. I'm very excited. Can't wait to see it.
Yeah, so that's fun. And I've always got the fun little Cascade Moon projects, including my latest release is a fun one that it's actually so low proof that it's not a whiskey anymore, which you'll be super familiar with, because they have a bunch of these in Scotland when they point at like the dusty old barrels, and they're like, that's so old, it's not even a whiskey anymore. Cascade Hollow has some of those. And so I bottled them on their own. I think kind of as a fun poke at the people who are like, I only drink like 140 proof, which I'm just, they're like the idea that high proof means high quality, which I'm just kind of poking fun at that with like what hopefully is a really obviously amazing whiskey, but is under 40%. So that's
wow. I'm excited to see that. Where
can we see that?
Yeah, it'll be a fun one. It's coming. So I just got bottled. It's getting shipped this month. And some of it is coming to New York. So.
All right, I'll look out for that. And I agree with you. Oh my God, I just judged at the ADI, and so many overproof whiskeys. I'm always on the judger on the whiskey table, and a lot of our feedback is you don't have the backbone to hold this proof. Like there's no structure here. All I taste is alcohol, no structure, no flavor. No, just bring it down. It's like, just stop doing this. You don't have the backbone.
It's supposed to be fun, guys. It's supposed to feel good.
Absolutely. All right, so we're gonna end it then. So I always end it with the same question, which is, what words of advice would you give to any either current brand ambassadors who are up and coming, or anybody looking to get into the industry? But Ewing, I'll start with you.
For God's sake, enjoy it. It's your work is where you spend a significant percentage of your time. If you're a brand ambassador, it's going to be probably an even more significant percentage of your time. So enjoy it, make the most of it. There's going to be challenging times, there are with any job, but you're likely surrounded by fun, passionate people who love what they do. Learn from them and have a good time. Not many jobs give you that. What else? Oh yeah, buy the best headphones you can afford, because they'll be worth every penny. So that's my words of advice.
I think those are great words of advice. Nicole?
Yeah. Enroll in those loyalty programs, man. Hotel and airline, right? Like, do all the things, get the credit card. Like, you're going to want all of that, is the best practical advice. And then I think understand that, I wish I had thought of this earlier, right? But like, understand that the bar is now the place that you work, and, treat it that way, right? Like, this is now, your career and your business, and like approach it with that level of professionalism. Have the fun, and like, that's what's so amazing about our industry. But just also always keep the part of your brain that tells you that like, you're at work right now, even though it can be awfully confusing because it's 2 a.m. and you're at a bar. Just keep that part of your brain going too.
Absolutely. Really, really, really great advice. So I'm all about those miles and points. And yes, the bar is no longer, and if you want to go to a bar to have fun, go to a bar. They have no idea who you are. Keep a couple of those that they have no idea who you are, and never talk business in those bars. And then you can relax where you are. It's advice that Philip gave me, because he refused to allow me to sell into some of our local bars. He's like, nope, This is
100%. Yeah. Yeah.
These are our places to relax. Well, Nicole, Ewing, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun. It was great to catch up with both of you. I look forward to doing it in person sometime, somewhere, in the near future. But thanks again, and thanks for anybody who was watching. Thank you so much for tuning in, and this will be on Facebook for the next 2 weeks, or you can find it on YouTube at Celebrate the Brand Ambassador. But until then, you guys, thanks again, and have a great day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Ewan. The other Ewan.